All right, everyone, the appointed hour is upon us. I'd like to call this meeting of the Madeira Beach Planning Commission to order. Will you please call the roll?
Chairman Wyckoff,
Present.
Commissioner Gavahi,
Here.
Commissioner Dillon,
Here.
Commissioner Noble,
Here.
Commissioner Connolly,
Here.
Commissioner Marr,
Here.
Commissioner LaRue.
Here.
All right, looks like we got a full table here. Thank you, everyone, for being here. At this point, we welcome public comment on any item not specifically on our agenda. If you have anything in general to say, we'd ask you to do that at this point. If you do come to the podium to speak, we ask to get your name and your address, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. If anybody has anything, please feel free to step forward. Okay. So the next item is with the approval of the minutes from last month's meeting. If I could have a motion to approve those minutes, please.
I make a motion to approve the meetings of last month's meeting.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the minutes. Anybody have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Please call the roll on the approval of the meeting minutes.
Who was that who seconded?
Mr. Govee.
Commissioner Dillon,
Yes.
Commissioner Gavahi,
Yes.
Commissioner Connolly,
Yes.
Commissioner Marr,
Yes.
Commissioner Noble,
Yes.
Commissioner LaRue,
Yes.
Commissioner Wyckoff.
Yes. Okay, we have approval of the minutes. The next item under new business is to vote on the second vice chair. At last meeting, you got a promotion from second vice chair. Mr. Dillon is now the first vice chair. So we need to fill one more spot with a person to fill the second vice chair position. So we'll open it up to someone who wants to be nominate someone or self-nominate. Don't be shy. Anyone?
I nominate Mr. Connolly.
Okay, we have the first, do you accept the nomination, sir?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a nomination of Mr. Connolly. Anyone else? I don't see anybody running for it. Okay, it looks like that's it. We'll take a vote to affirm Mr. Connolly as second vice chair.
Commissioner Dillon,
Yes.
Commissioner Marr,
Yes.
Commissioner Noble,
Yes.
Commissioner LaRue,
Yes.
Commissioner Gavahi,
Yes.
Commissioner Wyckoff.
Yes. All right, congratulations. You're going to love the job. Okay, I don't see anything under old business, item number 6, so we'll move to number 7, which is our administrative or staff presentation, please.
All right, we'll be talking about the land use consistency with our Madeira Beach Comprehensive Plan, our land development regulations with Fort Pinellas's countywide plan. On June 17th, we had a public meeting, an informational meeting that went extremely well. It was completely packed, and I think we solved a lot of questions that the public had. One of the biggest ones was how we have 3 maps. We have 3 land use designations for each parcel. We have the countywide plan map, and we have the Madeira Beach future land use map, and that is with the comprehensive plan. And then we have our zoning map, and that's in our code of ordinances and our land development regulations, and just the relationship between those 3. So a little bit of history. A lot of these slides look very familiar, so just to summarize, the comprehensive plan and the land development regulations were amended in 2007 and 2008 to include these alternative temporary lodging use standards, but it did not provide the clarifying the rights standards by right, and the temporary lodging use standards, how you have to use a development agreement to get those higher uses. So comparing the countywide plan map category with our comprehensive plan, you can see in the retail, what's retail and services with the countywide plan map category is equivalent to our commercial general and retail office residential. And we exceed what's allowed by right in the intensity and density. What the density is with our temporary lodging units per acre. It's very similar with the resort category, which is our resort facilities medium locally. And then comparing the countywide plan map category with our Madeira Beach zoning district category, that's your code of ordinances. The retail and services is equivalent to all of our commercial zones, C1 through C4. And in C1, C3, and C4, you're inconsistent with the intensity and some of the densities. And then the resort category with the countywide plan map is our resort facilities medium. We exceed what's allowed by right in the intensity and density, those temporary lodging units per acre. In the countywide standards, they have what I keep saying by right, not going through a development agreement process, just what you're allowed. And then they also have this alternative temporary lodging use standards. That's what we adopted in 07 and 08. So you can get up to FAR, floor area ratio of 1.2, and then it's higher with the resort category. Similar for the densities are higher what's allowed by right. And to use this alternative temporary lodging use standard, you must get a development agreement, which would come to Planning Commission and then the BOC for review. So the solution to become consistent with Fort Pinellas, do not want to create any non-conforming properties, and we must be consistent with the countywide plan. To be consistent, we need to clarify and reduce the temporary lodging units per acre and floor area ratio by right, clarify the requirements for that alternative temporary lodging use standard, clarify that FAR is only for commercial use, amend the definitions to be consistent with the countywide plan. So now we're looking at the maps. We have on the left side is the countywide plan map, and we're focusing on that resort category, which is on the west side of Gulf Boulevard, which is equivalent to our resort facilities medium. And then on the countywide plan to the east side of Gulf Boulevard is that retail and services category, which is equivalent to our commercial general and residential office retail. So you can see here that red and purple. The countywide plan map categories are on the left, the retail and services and resort, and then our comprehensive plan future land use categories. And these are the areas, these are the potential future standards for the comprehensive plan to become consistent with the countywide plan. So it's reducing the intensity by right to that FAR floor area ratio of 0.55, and then creating the alternative temporary FAR of 1.2. Very similar, commercial general and residential office retail. And then with the density, creating the by right, the temporary lodging units per acre is 40. That's the maximum allowed with the retail services by right. And then including that alternative temporary lodging. Similar to the resort, it's reducing to that 0.55 and then creating the alternative temporary lodging, intensity and density. So if we go to your packets, actually okay, so turning to your packets, what we provided on the dais, which is also at the back of the room, we received a letter from Fort Pinellas. They reviewed all of our amendments and came back with comments. So that's what was on the dais when you came in. We have the letter, and we printed out all the sections in the comprehensive plan, the land development regulations that the county had comments on, just so you could see those. So first is the comprehensive plan. This is a matrix, so it looks like on the TV. So the county wanted us to reorganize our comprehensive plan to be in a matrix format. So you can see it reduces the temporary lodging units per acre by right. It also includes the alternative temporary lodging use standards and inputting the permitted uses with the county's definitions, which were slightly different than what we had in our comprehensive plan and in our land development regulations. And then also adding the countywide plan map category that corresponds to our local future land use category. And at the end, on page 4 of the printed handout, you can see the development agreement requirement with the alternative temporary lodging use standards and how to use that. I know it's a lot, so if anyone has questions, please stop me.
Let me ask you a question, is that all right? So could you clarify the difference between resort, temporary lodging, and alternate temporary lodging? Could you sort of clarify that, please?
Are you talking about on page 2 of the handout?
Just along, as you were reading, there are many notations that discuss alternate lodging.
Yes, let me go back on this slide. So the resort category is the countywide category. It is on the west side of Gulf Boulevard. And then locally, that is within our comprehensive plan. That is our resort facilities medium. Those are the land use categories. And with the countywide plan standards, you can see the by right without going through a development agreement with the resort. You can get up to the temporary lodging units per acre, 50.
Wow.
And then they also have this provision for the alternative temporary lodging use that you can get up to FAR 2.2 to 4, temporary lodging units per acre, 75 to 125. That's their maximums allowed. So we do not have to adopt what's the maximum numbers, but that is in 2007 and 8, the city adopted the alternative temporary lodging use standards, not to these numbers. It was up to, let's see, 45 to 75. So it wasn't the 75 to 125. So we can go lower than these numbers. So we're just putting in the alternative temporary lodging use standards, how to use those standards to retain what we have currently, and then also defining what it is by right without going through the development agreement and using the alternative temporary lodging use standards.
I see. So alternative lodging would be incorporated as a part of a PD?
It wouldn't be a PD, it's just a development agreement.
Yeah, development agreement. Okay,
Yes.
so with the development agreement, you could ask for an alternative lodging
You could ask for an increase
increase.
to the numbers that we currently have. So the numbers that we currently have in our comprehensive plan and land development regulations are higher than what the county allows by right.
Okay, thank you.
Where does a condo hotel fall in our definitions here?
Condo hotel, I believe that is, in just a minute.
Is it a temporary dwelling temporary lodging, or is it under the single family or multifamily?
I think give me just a second. Condo hotel, if you look at page 17 in your packet, the
Yep.
very end of that page, it is considered a tourist, so temporary lodging.
Okay, so this is going to be our temporary lodging
Yes.
category, okay. And I think for clarity, the alternative temporary lodging use is not a different type of a property. It's the alternative to your
To the
by right,
temporary.
right?
Yes.
Okay. That, when I was reading through this originally, I thought, okay, now what's an alternative temporary lodging unit?
That makes sense.
So I was missing that, and I think that begs some clarification to make sure it's not another property type. It is the alternative to the intensity and density that's being proposed by right. Then as an alternative, you can go for a for a development agreement to get the alternative density and intensity use.
I like to imagine it as a bonus. So if you imagine it as a bonus, okay,
Good
you can get up
imagination.
to 40, or you can get a development agreement, you can get a higher density.
Okay.
And you have a list of incentives to allow for that alternate.
Through the development agreement, the county has a list of things that the development agreement has to include. And then that comes to planning commission, it goes to the board of commissioners, so there's more public input as well.
Okay.
So that is the draft of the comprehensive plan, the amendments. And now we can,
Hey Jenny, I had a question, actually.
yes.
The thing that I'm, actually, right there is good,
Oh.
where we just were.
This,
Go back one.
This
Yeah,
one?
right there.
okay.
So retail and services, we currently have, so are we gonna define C1, C2, C3, C4 in this way? Or are we combining all of the Cs into one, or into
No.
two different categories? Because there's commercial, general, and resort, right? But this looks like, I don't know,
So, okay,
we're not like
there's-
eliminating zoning categories.
no,
Okay.
you're
Yeah,
not.
okay.
So there are 3 designations for each parcel. You have your countywide plan,
Right.
and then you also have your.
Yeah,
and
so
then
we're just carrying
locally-
this through.
Yeah, we're
all three of
carrying
them,
it through our comprehensive plan and then our local development regulations, our
Got it.
LDRs,
Okay.
or land development regulations.
So we have subcategories, if you will, as compared to the countywide plan.
Yes.
And then we're just bringing all those subcategories that fit under that bigger county umbrella into
into
consistency
compliance.
with the countywide plan.
That's a good way to,
We're not eliminating our own zoning categories. We're just amending them so that anything that's in that C1, 2, 3, 4, which would be along the county's plan of retail services, we're going to make those 4 ratios and number of units consistent.
yes.
Okay, got it.
So temporary lodging, do you define that units per acre or based on FAR?
It's units per acre, the temporary lodging.
Okay, so
We also have to comply with FAR.
is it
So
both?
if you're using the alternative temporary lodging, it would be both. You would have to comply with the units per acre and the FAR. And this is a little odd, but when you use the alternative temporary lodging units, alternative temporary lodging, the alternative temporary lodging with the county, then you must use the FAR of the garage. Typically, we do not count the garage. It's usually like an enclosed space that you're counting the floor area.
It's not a gross floor per se,
Yes.
so, but
So we're going from what we currently have as a 1.2 FAR in some of these categories and reducing it to 0.55?
That would just be for the commercial aspect.
Right.
So we are changing how we're further defining how we calculate the floor area and with mixed use, similar to what the county does. And then we're also amending some of our definitions to be consistent with the county as well.
And then the only way to get back up to that higher floor area ratio would be the alternative to go through a development agreement.
Yes.
What's the county's position on development agreements then? Are they poo-pooing that idea? Because it's, I mean, that's a pretty massive reduction in floor area ratio from 1.2 to 0.55.
So the 0.55 would only be for the commercial. It would not be
Okay.
for the hotel. It would be
Okay.
if there's a restaurant or some commercial area in it. We
Okay,
would only calculate it units per acre at that point.
Just the point of clarification, we don't necessarily have to comply with county's regulations.
No, we must comply with the county's regulations.
Now, density-wise, we can't be greater than what they have, but we
We
can always
can't.
be less.
Yes, that's correct. And right now, we're over what they allow.
Yeah, I understand that. So that part is good, basically. Reducing in a lot of cases, I think it's pretty good.
And then we're allowing for what we currently allow
Okay.
through that alternative temporary, which
But-
we have in our code. It was not clear when it was adopted back in.
Right, but areas that density/intensity are lower than Pinellas County, we don't necessarily have to increase it to match theirs. We can keep it
Correct.
where it is
We
or
can keep it
discuss
where
that
it
further.
is.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, so looking at the land development regulations, that's where you have your zoning, the zoning map. So looking at the countywide plan map, this is the east and west side of Gulf Boulevard. So at the resort category with the county, that is our R3, that brown category. And then with the retail services, that's our C1 through C4 zoning categories. And this looks very similar. We're reducing the by right FAR and temporary lodging units per acre down to 0.55, so what the county allows. And then allowing for that alternative temporary lodging units per acre at 60, which is what's in the code currently. But just defining how to get there through that development agreement process.
Would you explain to us the difference between resort facility and, let's say, overnight accommodation?
That is in the definitions. Are you talking about vacation rentals?
No, just resort. Basically, resort facility, it generally has a different type of use. It's longer stay. Basically, they can stay for as long as one wants, like a month, 2 months. That's typically resort. And overnight accommodations, basically per night.
I mean, that's just basically the name of the category in our comp plan. It doesn't really have kind of a specific, I mean, we just treat it as a nightly rental, like, for temporary lodging, or if someone's renting out their condo nightly. But I think that's what's kind of confusing is like they have these kind of general names of these categories or in the countywide plan and in our comp plan, and it gets confusing. Because then it's like, what does resort facilities mean? And it's like basically our version of their resort, which is just more of like a general kind of mixed use category with some temporary lodging, some residential uses, some commercial uses.
But densities, the density between resort facility and overnight accommodation. So how would you, density, intensity, how would you?
I mean, temporary lodging, that's hotel, motel, and condo hotel. That's how we treat it.
Yes.
Condo units are residential use, even if it's nightly rental.
make sense?
No, but I accept.
I think we, sometimes we get lost in the condo hotel hybrid thing,
No,
right?
I-
But that's being treated as a resort a temporary lodging unit, not as single-family. There are condos that do permit shorter stays, 1 week or 3-day minimums or whatever. Those are not considered temporary dwelling units because they're
Correct.
actually condo by definition, right? You can live there. In a condo hotel or a hotel, you can't live there.
Yeah, a condo hotel, basically the difference between condo hotel and a regular hotel is that each unit can be owned by somebody
else.
So
separately.
we're adding, if you look at page 34 of your packet, that's in the definitions section. We're adding a few definitions to be consistent with the county. And one is vacation rental use, which is very similar to if you're renting out your house, you're renting out your condo, where it's built like a residential unit, but then you can also do the nightly rentals. Like in the R3, you're allowed to do nightly rentals.
I guess just one thing to clarify, with our definition with condo hotel, you can't use it and convert it to a permanent non-tourist dwelling unit. So you can't convert a condo hotel to a residential condominium.
Right.
And
By our
that's
definition.
page 17
Yeah.
on your packet.
Just
Has a
to
condo
clar-
hotel definition, and then on the next page is the hotel definition.
How about the planned developments? As I'm looking on the one sheet, we've got 3 planned developments in the county's resort area. Do they conflict?
They received a development agreement, so I would have to do more research on that, but I would assume that they would be okay based on the fact that if they did use the standards that are currently in our code, the 60 units per acre, they did receive a development agreement. They did go through that process.
Well, I'm just wondering as to whether or not if those 3 areas could cause a problem that they're not compliant.
I've checked at least with the Barefoot Beach Club, which is in the Resort Facilities Medium, and then the Courtyard Marriott that's in the Commercial General, and they don't exceed the county with the alternative temporary lodging use standards. It doesn't exceed those, and those have development agreements, so.
I mean, because we're going through all of this, and I'd hate to have those 3 little blips down there like, oh, well, those aren't compliant.
They received development agreements, and this is just clarifying. We're not reducing, we're clarifying how to use those alternative temporary lodging use standards.
We'll have to acknowledge some non-conforming densities out there, and we have to sort of accept it, and from here on, just move on with the new density regulations.
The more of the non-conforming issues down there are more with the residential condominium uses that were built like like 1983, give or take.
So they would be legally non-conforming
Yeah.
just prior to the
Yeah,
zoning being written.
But anything newer is not really an issue, because they went through the development agreement process.
So I had someone ask me a question, and I couldn't give them a great answer on it. Actually, I couldn't even give them a decent answer. When, we're looking at the zoning map, right? You had the county zoning map and the city zoning map, and then we have the future land use map. When do we start using the future land use map?
This is what's confusing. That is the title of the comprehensive plan land use elements. It's all future land uses. That doesn't mean we're planning to change everyone's land to residential office retail or another standard. That's the categories, and that's how they're named in our comprehensive plan. So that's a land use under the zoning category. So each parcel has 3 maps, 3 categories, county, and then 2 local. One is just called the future land use element, and the future land use map.
Okay, so when would the future one kick in? Is it when it gets redeveloped, or is it?
Wouldn't kick in.
Doesn't matter, it doesn't ever?
That's
it's
just what it's called.
Just a,
It's-
So it's just a
future-
page we have to have in there, and it really doesn't do
Well,
anything.
no,
for it.
future land use basically describes density. So when you want to discuss density intensity, you look at your future land use map, and that's where you find that. Now, if you want to talk
Yes.
about just regular land use,
Gotcha.
then you look at your zoning, and the zoning criteria will determine the setbacks, the height, and parking requirements and all that.
It has more of the nitty gritty of what you think of when you're thinking of what can I do with my land, usually thinking of the zoning,
Okay.
land development regulations.
Okay, so you want us at this point to do what? Are we supposed to,
This is just a presentation right now.
and we're going to
Any
come back and visit
questions?
this another time
We're
for
hoping to,
approval?
exactly, we're hoping to have this ready next month.
Okay.
Hopefully, with the county's comments, and that's what you received on the dais today.
Okay.
It's all the county's comments. So next month, we're hoping to have this ready for you for recommendation to BOC.
Do you
and it'll
foresee
be
any major
3.
changes
No,
before the next meeting that we?
no. If we do, it would be extremely minor.
Okay, so we need to flesh this out and get all of our own questions answered before next meeting so that we can come to you
That
with
would be
good, solid
ideal,
stuff. I mean,
yeah.
I have some questions now, but I think we've answered most of them.
So we have the amendments to the comprehensive plan, that's the matrix, and then you have amendments to all the zoning categories. It's C1, C2, C3, C4, R3. And then you have the amendments to the definitions in the code as well. So there'll be three different items.
Okay, I mean, it
So-
looks like what's been done helps clarify a lot of things that were up in the air.
Yeah, and so if you look at starting at page 40, if you look at the permitted uses, a lot of those are changing, but they're changing just based on the countywide definitions. We have to adopt their definitions, so it looks a little different. We're not changing any of the permitted uses. It's all staying the same. It's just cleaning it up to be consistent with the county.
We don't necessarily have to make our zoning regulation consistent with the county. We can do, I mean, the land use would have to be at the county level or below it, but our land development code does not have to be consistent with the county.
It has to be consistent with the county. It can't go over what the county.
Just the density, though, just the density. I mean, the height is
Oh,
some.
the height is up, that we didn't even touch
It's a
that.
local-
That is
it's
the
a local
same.
thing.
That is local. Same for setbacks. None of that is changing. None of that is changing. It's just being consistent with the county. So you have your definitions and then changing in our land development regulations where those definitions in the zoning categories show up. We're changing that to be consistent with the county. We're making sure the alternative temporary lodging use provision is in our zoning, in our comprehensive plan, and that is clear as well. None of the setbacks are changing, nothing, we're not amending anything to
Are
that.
you going to have another Saturday open to the public meeting?
No, we do not.
Because I found that very, very helpful, and I thought you guys did a great job
Thank you.
explaining a lot of things that cleared my mind up, and I thought that was great.
We don't plan to have another Saturday meeting.
Okay.
So we're hoping to resolve this and clean it up. We do have that loaded online on our website and on YouTube. So you can feel free to direct people to those videos.
Jenny, will this be going to a BOC workshop meeting?
No, we do not have it planned to go to the BOC
Okay, just
workshop.
wanted to double check with that.
We brought this to last BOC workshop on the 28th. Looks exactly what you have in your packet. We recently received that letter from Forward Pinellas on the 5th, So that's why we couldn't put that in your packet. The packet was already uploaded by that time. And those comments are very minor.
So are you going to respond to Forward Pinellas?
Yes, yes, we've been talking to Forward Pinellas
I mean,
closely.
discussing tonight's meeting?
Not tonight's meeting. We're amending with the comments that they provided us, which was on the dais, and then we plan to encompass that and bring that to Planning Commission and also discuss their comments, Forward Pinellas's
I
comments.
mean, unless we vote on something, you can't really,
This is just discussion. This isn't.
yes, so we
any
haven't
vote.
voted on anything tonight.
Correct. We
So
haven't voted on
I
anything.
would say that I would like to refrain from, discussing things with Forward Pinellas until we vote on some things, because I really don't feel very comfortable in a lot of areas here. We need to get our hands on the definition of resort facility versus overnight accommodation. Resort facility typically means a lot less density that is more consistent with condos and apartments, units. That's resort facility, basically, I'm very uncomfortable with what we have here in front of us tonight. So I would love to, spend a little more time getting better understanding of what the definitions are and how the density units apply.
The county's definition for what you're talking about is the vacation rental, and that's how they define if you're doing a rental out of a home, out of a condo, not a condo hotel.
Yeah, I understand that, but the length of stay makes a big difference. Overnight accommodation, the length of stay is much less than resort facility. And, I mean, yeah.
I know, we've been kind of like with the certain, because I have to handle like checking the zoning on business tax receipts. We have the only places we currently have restrictions on nightly rentals or our area that got, our law, got grandfathered in before the state basically took away the right for cities to regulate nightly rentals. So the only places we have restrictions right now in the city that law got grandfathered in are in the R1 zoning district, which is 6 months, and R2 zoning district, which is 3 months. And those are areas we're not touching with these ordinances. We don't, at least from what I can tell, we don't really have the power anymore to restrict nightly rentals elsewhere in the city.
Okay.
Once you change your ordinances regarding the duration of stay, you basically invalidate all ordinances related to that. So we definitely don't want to touch those, or we open
Yeah.
up
We
a can
don't
of worms
plan
like
to
Indian
touch
Rocks
any of
Beach and
that.
Reddington Beach has right now. The lawsuits are flying all over the place.
The duration of the state is only one item.
Right.
The size is also typically resort facility, you can build it like a house, a resort facility. So, tourists can stay there for maybe 30 days, 40 days, 60 days, 2 months. That's resort facility. They can bring 2 families, 3 families, and just spend time there for as long as, they want. So that's a resort facility, and that falls typically with a typical residential unit, condos. Overnight accommodation, again, the units will have to be really, really small. It can't be more than like 600, 700, 800 square feet. They can't typically have a big kitchen.
Where are you finding that definition of resort facility?
I can provide that to this team.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful to have some clarity on
Yes.
what defines resort facility.
Email
So that
that
we're all singing from the same sheet of
Yeah,
music,
I'll
right?
be glad to
Yeah.
provide that. It's all state
Sure.
described.
I think it's important that we're all understanding exactly what that is. And there is a definition in our codes about temporary dwelling. There's a maximum size, like condo hotels, they have a minimum and a maximum for a one-bedroom and a two-bedroom and all that too. It's deep in there, but it's in there. And it's not in what we're looking at tonight, but that is in there. And then I think the resort thing that I'm picturing that you're saying is more like a regular condo, but it happens to be an area zoned for shorter term stays,
Yes.
but the typical visitor stays, like our snowbirds, for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, right?
Yes.
All right, so we probably need to bring a little bit of clarity to that if we can.
Also, one clarification, so this is all the 7A packet. So the first group of it, the only changes are the red underlined, that's what's going to have to be added.
Yes.
And
Anything
then-
underlined is being added, and then a strike through is being removed.
Okay. And so that's where all of 7A is going to be brought back to us again for final vote and approval.
Right?
Yes.
So between now and the next meeting, brew a strong pot of coffee, sit down with
It's
this
a
and
lot.
live it, learn it, and love it. It's a lot to unpack, but it's important that we bring this in consistency.
So, but basically, the only red, everything else is already existing. The red is being added to our ordinances.
Correct.
Or the red is
Yes.
being deleted from the
Yes.
ordinances.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
One thing just to clarify, so if you look at Fort Pinellas's letter that they gave to us, because they reviewed the comprehensive plan amendment and the LDR amendments, so they only found from the drafts we sent very little changes that we'd make between now and when it comes back to the planning commission. So as you can see, they're like little changes that is mostly just like changing a couple words here or there, because so that's what I mean. We've been coordinating with them and making sure that we take their feedback and implement them, but as it is not really that much suggested the change that for us to do. It's just cleaning up a couple little things, but.
And that's what was on page 81 of our packet, the letter from Pinellas.
No, the latest letter was on the dais.
Yeah, the newest letter is here. It's
From
much
July
more
the
succinct.
5th.
Okay.
Yeah, they sent it in to us, after we published the agenda. We were trying to get it sooner, but that's the date we got it on.
Okay. So that's basically in lieu of the letter on 81 that was dated February.
The previous letter, let me take a look at
Yeah,
this.
a lot has been updated since then, and if you look at the letter we got tonight, it's very minor things. Just for example, under the definitions in LDRs, the city uses gross land area, they want us to use net land area. Just little things like that, nothing earth-shattering. And breaking out a couple different zoning categories with the same terminology that they're using versus ours.
Yes.
Looks pretty simple. All right, so I guess
So this will come before you.
next month, right? So we're kind of done with
Yes.
this for right now. Right? Anybody got any other specific questions about this before you have your homework and get ready to totally unpack this and pick it apart next month?
Well, that's what I saw of it before. I was like,
Yeah, it was a head scratcher
actually,
when I opened it.
John and I had 2 parcels of it.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Okay, so everybody good with wrapping that one up under 7A, the land use consistency with Fort Pinellas? Good for the moment? All right, we'll move on to B, which is shade structures.
Hey, give me 1 second here. For some reason I truncated all my sentences on the memorandum, so I'm trying to see if it shows up better on the PDF. Okay. First? Okay. I'm not sure.
stuff.
Oh, yours is there, nice, okay, cool. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the shade structure, 7B, that we have on the agenda tonight. So a little bit of background about the shade structure. Madeira Beach Land Development Regulations do not define shade structure, nor any structure that would be directly comparable. While we have definitions for structure broken into subcategories of major, minor, non-habitable major, and coastal or shore protection, only the minor definition makes mention of a gazebo, which would be the kind of like the closest thing that would jump into people's minds. Other definitions reviewed were accessory building as a general provision definition and accessory structure defined for reference in the floodplain management. Neither of these address shade structures. The LDRs that will require review and possible alterations are mentioned here in this document and have been provided as an attachment. Pending any alteration in definitions and verbiage, other LDRs may be subsequently impacted as well to be addressed accordingly at that time. Links to all the code references were provided in this document. Things that we thought were important for discussion as we go through this topic. Permitting for accessory structures in Madeira Beach has some unique considerations. All of Madeira Beach lies within a special flood hazard area, and several areas further fall into coastal high hazard areas. As an example, most all of Bay Point is a coastal high hazard area. And I gave a link to the FEMA flood maps. With regards to floodplain management, FEMA allows for accessory structures at-grade structures only when utilized for parking or storage, and they have limited sizing. Some of the things that the city staff thought would be important as we begin to talk about this and decide, how the city wants to address adding shade structures are the following. Defining shade structure and/or sun shelter with differentiation between shades that are freestanding structures attached to and extended out from the house or retractable styles. What setbacks would be applicable to the structure? What is the allowable square footage and height? What construction would be limited? Would we do 4 minimally sized posts composed of what type of material? Like, would we want to start limiting that? Ensuring that the structure has no walls. Would we want to limit the roof material that we would allow? If other than an official cheeky hut, what permit design documents would be required? How will the allowance of these structures be viewed by FEMA, and what impact could it have on our community rating system? Visibility for neighboring properties, potential for more outdoor kitchens, and what to do with shade structures that are already built and unpermitted. I mean, as a whole, city staff agrees that, the shade structure topic is important and, definitely helps with the quality of life for the residents, and we understand the desire to get these. So as a whole, we recommend in-depth discussion and consideration for permitting these type structures. While we understand they are seen throughout the city and adjacent cities, research indicates that most all adjacent cities do not permit these type structures by right and hold pretty much the same requirements as Madeira Beach. As far as fiscal impacts, there are no anticipated fiscal impacts, with the possible exception of increased permit fees associated with permitting and inspections. A foreseeable impact would be the community rating system and points the city receives for enforcement of FEMA recommended allowances for accessory structures. And so to this, we provided the ordinances referenced here. It'll mainly touch on some of the R1, R2, R3, setbacks, coverage, just several of the things that we already kind of touched on. So I'm not familiar with, totally what we're asking for their input on or how we want to, what the goal here is for this type of discussion. So I guess we just present it to you guys and go, what do you think? Talk to us.
So I'm going to ask our city attorney for clarification for a moment, if it would be out of order. I assume some of you guys are here to talk about some of these items. Would it be appropriate to allow public discussion, even though it's not an item that we're voting on, but to allow input?
It would be at your pleasure if you wish to.
Okay. Well, out of respect for the folks that took the time to show up, I think it would be important to listen to what they have to say if you guys are okay with that. Absolutely. I'd hate to see them waste an evening being here just listening to us talk back and forth about what we may or may not do in the future, because it's important to know what they have to say about it as well. So if my fellow board members are okay with it, at this point, I'd like to open it up to public comment. I will ask you to keep it to 3 minutes if at all possible. This could go on for a while. But when you do step up, please give us your name and your address, and let us know what you have to say. You got the short straw, you get to go first, huh?
I've been here plenty of times, it's fine.
Okay.
So basically, I wanted to come today, and actually, I talked last time I was here that we had put together a petition for our local Madeira Beach residents. I posted it to Nextdoor, so it was isolated to just people that live in Madeira Beach. So you'll see, I have copies here of the petition, the people that signed the petitions. I noticed that wherever your email is registered, that's the city it puts on the CSV file. So you may see some cities that are like not in the local area, but if you look up those names and addresses, they are, I've looked them all up.
Okay.
There are residents of our city. So I also attached the petition just so you can see what it said. And just to show the vast interest in our community, I only brought it up here, so you can see the desire really
Thank you.
for our neighbors to provide shade.
Sure.
And to enjoy
Thank you.
the exterior of our homes.
Thank you.
So just have a review of that, and, we've had a lot of conversations with our neighbors. We know that, as you guys do, that there are existing structures already that exist, ours being one of them. We know that there is a reactive code enforcement right now, not a proactive. So unless somebody complains, like in our case, then we really haven't really touched on. And I think that what happens is that somebody's like, oh, well, my neighbor has one and I really want shade, so I'm just gonna build one. And that's what's happening. So if we could define, I loved your presentation in the beginning, if we can really define what that means and realize that the 30-foot setback is ridiculous, then I'd like to see that happen for all of us. So, thank you.
Thank you. And are you Christina?
Yes.
Okay,
Christina.
thank you.
Hi, everyone. Jason Hoke. I'm at 406 Normandy Road. Lifelong Florida resident, 48 years old, just moved here in October. It was my lifelong dream to live on the saltwater. I finally made it, and I absolutely love it here. So we've already made made our house our own, done a few things here and there, mostly interior decorating. One of the things we haven't been able to do is do the outside of our house. We've got a fantastic pool, fantastic landscaping, but it's unbearable. We faced west in the afternoon. It's, some of you probably know, it's brutal. I used to have a men's Bible study every Wednesday at my house. We can no longer do that, so until the winter comes at least. I've put some umbrellas up. Those have folded in half from the winds that we've gotten. I learned the hard way, so can't leave umbrellas up out back. But yeah, we love to entertain, we love to enjoy our outdoor space, but it's very, very hard. It's impossible. Like you said, you go to Treasure Island, you go to Inny Rosh, you go to other places, and people build whatever they want. And some cities enforce it, some don't. I don't want to do anything to block my neighbors' views. I don't want to make Madeira Beach a place that's, the Wild West, but I do want to have an option to put something out back if need be. And I hope you guys will figure out a way to make that happen so we can all do something for shade. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Just ditto that? Okay, perfect. Mr. Rosick?
Hi, everyone. Jim Rostek, Mayor of Madeira Beach. My address is protected. I'm a retired public safety employee. I just did a quick search on the internet. I'm sorry about the phone. My God. Cape Coral. if you took a look at them, they have a rear 6-foot setback on the rear on theirs. They'll allow up to 150 square foot, 14-foot high max. Palm fronds have to be sacrificed at 70 miles an hour. Sun shelter, they call it, no sidewalls. Waterfront lots, they're actually permitted on the dock there. And then you got to keep in mind, we also have those 2 ordinances that allow, and I sent those to Commissioner Dillon earlier today, in regards to what view we're entitled to, and it's actually only straight out the back of the property. Per the ordinances, that any vegetation can grow to its normal height. So the argument of it's going to block my view, maybe yes, maybe no. Just food for thought. I apologize for that phone ringing back there. Thank you.
No, excellent research, because I came across what you came across at Cape Coral as well, and I do have some links to that information if anybody's interested. So I did try to do a hard search for municipalities that were up against what we were up against, similar to us, that had found ways to make certain things work. So yeah, for sure.
Did that meet the FEMA requirements, you know? I mean, they just went through it, right? So.
Sorry, I'm still diving into all the pieces, but when I was trying to pull some stuff together, I did come across where they had come up with exactly what he said, the sun shelter kind of stuff. So yeah, so actually, and on some other topics, I've actually just called other communities to get some one-on-one feedback from them, what they went through. So that'll be part of this research for me as well.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone else got anything? We good? Okay, we'll close the public comment then. Thank you, folks, for coming out, really appreciate that. So I guess this is another one of those, it's just a presentation for us at this point, right? You want us to come back with some recommendations and sort of dive more deeply into it, or is there some version of action you
Just
want us to?
discussion and what direction
Okay,
y'all would like to see this, or what other research you would like staff to do.
okay. I'll open it up to my colleagues. Anything you want to add, discuss, recommend?
Well, I'll speak for myself, but I think that something's got to be done. But what, and I'm 100% for putting, because you want everybody to be happy. So if they need us,
That's a problem.
well, yeah.
Well, this guy's happy, neighbor's not, it's one of those things, right?
So it's just a matter of what the city would like to see. And I think that we could all go with that, because I want to see those people happy.
Sure. Anybody else? Mr. Dillon?
My 2 cents would be similar to docks. You have to get your neighbor's permission to do docks out of the ordinary. And once they're there, they're there. And to deal with the existing stuff, that's tricky. I mean, and I hate to say I understand, and I've seen you here, but your hut's huge. I mean, and in terms of,
Keep in mind, we're also up, we had a variance to raise our deck so that I wouldn't have to walk downstairs. So
Okay.
it looks huge because it's up higher than normal.
Gotcha.
oh, yeah, I mean, but then here, once again, everybody moved down here, and as you know, you pay dearly for your property on the water. Also, part of being in paradise is what you have to pay for living on the water. Everything deteriorates. It goes badly. For all those people on that one side of all the island in Crystal Island. I live on Lillian. I'm fortunate. I'm an odd number. So I don't have the beastly hot afternoon sun. So I can, and as I'm looking at the neighbors across the canal, I feel terrible for them because, it's beastly, and especially this time of year. However, it's a slippery slope. because once we go down it, there's no coming back. And, I mean, you know, I think the only way that could potentially be feasible is get your approval of the next door neighbor. And even that's going to be kind of tricky, because 2 doors down from me, they got a 38-foot dock extension. So their dock goes out 38 feet. I mean, you know, so now you've got a big sailboat there. So that has cut down dramatically on my view. But yet, I have no say in that. But yet, the neighbor decided he was fine with it. You know, so it's a slippery slope going down there. And as everybody's building up and everything, it's, you know, I think, and we've been listening to this for quite a while, so I've tried to figure out how it could be done. And as to whether or not your neighbors, and once it's approved, it's just like, okay, so when you buy the house as it is. And what structures are next to you are there. If your neighbor doesn't like it, I'm not sure. You know, it's tricky. I mean, you know, but I think that could be the way to make it acceptable. And, yeah, and in terms of to get to know your neighbor better. You know, they might say, okay, well, maybe something half that width or half that depth, you know, which it gets into, you know, I don't know whether it's that much more work for the city to do it, but yet it's a possibility. I mean, you know, but then unfortunately, if your neighbors don't agree with it, I don't know. I mean, you know, because like they're your neighbors, you know, there are all city people, but yet there's, yeah, either there is or there isn't. And then maybe the next person that moves into your neighbor's house will love it, and they'll want to have one too. So it's.
Then they got to get the next guy's approval.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
Question, who's going to solve that battle?
yeah, need a mediator.
They're
for
opening
every-
up a can of worms.
Yeah. All right, what else we got for comments? Anyone on this
I
end
was
of
just
the
going to say,
room?
some properties could be underwater and some are not underwater. So the gazebo that we see is on a property that's abutting a seawall. There could be one also in the middle of the, you know, subdivision. So when I look at something like this, I think what comes to mind is just a few things that I would want to be careful with. Obviously, height is a concern. Setbacks, and it needs to be structurally designed so that it meets the, you know, the hurricane standards. And visibility, of course, there should be some sort of a visibility triangle, especially if it's underwater where you can't be blocking your neighbor. So, but, you know, those are probably the only questions I would have to be addressed.
But the mayor made a comment in the workshop that the height restrictions, but you can plant vegetation on both sides of your property all the way to the water, and it can grow up, and you have a hedge,
Actually,
so
if you have that visibility triangle, you could not, the vegetation would have to be within 30 inches height or something
where's
like
the
that.
enforcement coming there?
Again, that's a reactive thing. Somebody brought up the reactive, right? And that's sort of what happens, right? So technically, I think the city, for many years, I've been here since I was 12 years old. I don't want to tell you how long it's been. It's a long time. The city has, and I've been involved with this. I was on the Board of Adjustment back in the day and all that stuff, so I've got a little bit of a history with this. The city's always been super protective of sightlines and visibility of neighbors, right? So that's why when you're waterfront, your docks are supposed to be in the middle third. That way you can't have boats and things in the way. We don't allow boat houses, all those things to impinge on views. But to Mr. Rostek's point, there are other municipalities that don't have that same viewpoint, if you will, on what you're entitled to, what your bundle of rights is when you purchase a piece of property. And we've gone through this in some of our planning meetings where we've looked at PDs or things where they're gonna tear down a little place on the beach and put up a 8 or 10 story or whatever they're applying for, and the people across the street say, well, that's not fair to me because I had a view of the beach from the 3rd floor of my townhouse. Now, if they put up a 5-story building, I won't have a view. And our answer is, well, you're not entitled to that view, right? Because it's across the street. So where does that line get drawn on what you're entitled to? Of course, nobody wants to be the bad neighbor and block everyone, so you're only looking down a little bowling alley, right? But, so there's got to be some common sense to it. I think if there is a setback requirement from the water, I mean, there's so many parts to this, right? We just went through a pandemic. Everybody had to stay home. What are you going to do? Sit in your house all day? I mean, if you don't have any outdoor area to enjoy without getting your skin burned off from the heat in the middle of the afternoon. I'm in the same boat as some of you guys. I face southwest, so I'm getting broiled and, you know. Sir?
Can I come back up for just a second?
Yeah, come on. Let's see what you got to say. This is discussion. Let's discuss.
This is easy. Go ahead and review ordinance 2021-17 and 2021-18. Those are the two that I sent to Mr. Dillon earlier today, and that they both concern line of sight, vegetation growth, and the
Okay.
only view that you're entitled to is straight at the back of your house. But look at those two ordinances.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Just because you're the mayor, I'll let you do that. So, no, I appreciate that, and I think that's something we all need to consider as we're talking about maybe, you know, maneuvering around this particular subject. I know, you know, one of the things you brought up is, what do we do with ones that are already there, right? I mean, do you make them tear them down? The other thing to look at, which I don't think is appropriate at this point, obviously, but the other thing we need to look at, what's our impact on our community rating with FEMA? So we have to be cognizant of that if we start moving down the line to where we approve these things. Our third item is the setback requirement for accessory structures, right? So I think that's part of the package. We need to have a 2.5-foot setback from the side at least for vegetation control, that sort of thing. So all those things need to be bundled into this discussion. Personally, I'm okay with it, right? I mean, I think what you have here, well, yours looks like it's, if it was built by the Seminole Indians. Yeah, so you don't even need to have a permit, right? You just build whatever the heck they want.
It's so solid into the carpet, like it is.
Yeah. But not, and I love it, but not everybody's going to want a thatched hut thing. They're going to want a standing seam metal roof, or they're going to want something shingles, or what, you know, cedar shingles or whatever. So all those things we need to consider when we start crafting this language, right, on what's allowed. I think as we move to newer construction, the redevelopment that's going on to be FEMA compliant to get us 12 feet to the bottom of the of the lowest floor, this sight line thing is going to be a non-issue because you're going to be above that, right? Your living room and your balcony is going to be above. If we put a height limit on these things, I did see somewhere we talked about a height limit of 10 feet. We need to define that. Is that to the pitch of the roof, to the bottom of the eaves? You know, so some of those things need to get clearly defined so that we understand exactly what we're getting ourselves into. Personally, I'm in favor of allowing stuff like this. I think we need to maximize the usefulness of our properties. We have small lots, you know, in a lot of cases. If you look at us compared to other municipalities, we have 40-foot wide lots on the water in some cases, 50-foot wide lots. It's not a lot of room to build a big house, and you want to live there. Part of your living in this tropical paradise is to be able to be outside without, you know, getting skin cancer screenings every 45 minutes because you're outside. So anyway, that's my 2 cents, and I'll just leave that at that.
Michael,
Love it or hate it, and it's just my opinion.
the next thing is if you go out on Bay Point, they've raised the grade of the new homes 5-6 feet above the street level, and then they're 12 feet above that.
Well, that's a whole separate
So-
issue, but the 12 feet is from mean high tide, right, base flood elevation, not the ground. So if you raise it up, if you were able to raise your dirt up 12 feet, you could pour a slab on that 12 feet and you'd be okay. But we've already had that issue come up where we stopped allowing the infilling of lots because we were having drainage issues, especially on Bay Point Drive, which is where I grew up, on 915 Bay Point Drive. But that street, that south end of that street is actually 12 inches lower than the north end of that street. So that street always flooded. So when people redeveloping, before we realized there was a problem, they created the problem unknowingly, saying, hey, we should build our dirt up. So now they got the runoff from these bigger houses coming down and running into the neighbors' low-lying properties. So we've got ordinances in place that do not permit you to build up your lot anymore, right? And we also have drainage surveys that have to be done before a new site plan is approved, correct? So that would address that issue.
With the new single-family homes, yes, we're requiring the topographic surveys. And like you said, the problem with the limited lot widths is as you raise your property, your ability to recover from raising it to get a proper swell, to get the water off your property becomes impossible. So unfortunately, though it sounds great in theory, once you start raising the lots, you start to create other issues. And, the water can only go front or back. Other than that, it's going to hit somebody else, so.
Yeah.
And I do want to say with regards to the cheeky huts, they do not have to be inspected as part of a building permit, but planning and zoning, they still have to meet the requirements of where they're located. So the setbacks, the ISR still apply to them. It's just the building code inspections that they do not have to adhere to.
And then we need to define the materials in
Size.
our ISRs too. Like is a wood deck with a 1/4-inch gap between boards, is that pervious, impervious, right? All those things need to be looked at because technically a deck that has gaps between the boards allows the rainwater to go through it. So that's no longer an impervious surface. But if there's a roof over it, then what? I mean, so you have all these different little issues that we need to look at, little big issues to look at.
And
Yeah, well, I mean, we collectively as the city,
Yeah.
let's
Thank you.
call it
No.
that, not me.
And there are a lot of things
I
to
got a day
consider,
job.
because you do have properties that have basically said, okay, here's, we're building a new home, here's our setbacks, we're gonna max that out, we're gonna max out our pool deck. Our ISR is magically 0.1% right below what we're allowed to have. And then we go, oh, hey, now you can have a hut. And they're like, what? We didn't know we could have a hut. So where are we gonna put that? So there's a lot of things we're gonna think about and just, but you do have a staff that is looking at it, so we definitely know that people want it. So it's not about keeping the pressure on us to keep it in our forefront. We are looking at it and trying to figure out what our options are. I definitely think we'll get to a point where, some feedback and some thoughts around what we're thinking will be revisited and kind of as we start to solidify it, if that is the direction we decide to go. But you guys discuss a lot of the issues. You hit everything we're struggling with. So if it was easy, we'd have done it. We get why it's necessary, why it does help the quality of life of everybody. So we're trying.
Would it help? Would it help if it's redefined not as a shade structure, as a tiki hut? I mean, because a shade structure, they're talking about the $200,000 dog park shade structure, which is truly just shades. So I think maybe define it even more so of a wall-less tiki hut.
And I do think because we don't have a definition yet, we do have kind of a clean slate with that approach, unlike some other things in our code, which we'll be discussing in a minute. But yeah, we do kind of have a clean slate with how we approach that and how we
It would have to
define
be something that's, defined as it's got a roof, it's got four or more permanently installed posts, blah, whatever. There has to be something. I don't, whether you call it a tiki hut, gazebo, whatever, it's kind of immaterial. We would have the opportunity to create our own definition of that. Yeah, they're all good points to the folks here. I guess it's okay for me to ask you, are you contemplating trying to build something? Is that why you're here? So this taking a year and a half is not going to be in your best interest, right? Right. So the only reason I bring that up is because
I work for a large corporation, so I'm used to things moving very slowly. And it's like super frustrating. So
I get it.
and I get the challenges because, you're trying to make everyone happy and it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
Right? So I get it.
Yeah, so my vision is we come up with a package of, new ordinance subset for whatever we're going to call it, the shade structure. I'll just use that for now. And then we're going to have a room full, yeah, we want it. No, we don't, and then it's just going to come down to who votes for what, right? But I think it's definitely something that we need to look forward to because I think a lot of people are doing that. This area, when it was first developed, was really, it was not a bedroom community. It was a second home area, temporary. They'd come for the winters or weekends or a week or so here and there. And a lot of the houses that were built, if you look at the older places, especially on the north end of Madeira Beach, 145th, 6th, and 7th, and 8th, they're little bitty houses on little bitty lots. They were never meant to live there full time. And we're seeing those growing pains because now people are here and they're living here as a permanent residence year round. And it's a little difficult to live on a 40 by 40 foot lot, frankly, right? So we're seeing these things happen. And same thing with a lot of the waterfront houses. They were second homes. It was not a big deal. I'm only here for part of the time. But now when you're living here full time, your style changes in how you use it. So I think it needs to be addressed. I think we've hit the hot points. Or anything you guys see or want to recommend that they dig a little more deeply into before we start moving towards crafting some sort of ordinance?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that I'm in favor of it, and I think when this first came up, the initial concerns were just like, we didn't really have any sort of, we had nothing that really defined these. So personally, what I would like to see at the next time we discuss this is like, how would you fit that into a code that takes into account and minimizes the CSR stuff, takes into account structural limitations, even if it's just a total stab at numbers, and it's like a new section of code for this specific structure, something that we can actually look at and kind of like discuss and mark up. But that comes from, that's going to come from all the research and actually just almost putting it out. I mean, I guess I'm asking you to write code, but really just an outline
It'll be
even.
borrowed
So we
from
can,
other
so we
places,
can,
I'm sure.
so we can have something physical to kind of look at and dissect that takes all of this research and puts it into, 2 paragraphs and subparagraphs, and makes it its own structure, because we don't want to lump this, I don't think we want to lump these into some other things. I think they have special requirements, and we have to, you almost want to isolate it as much as you
For sure.
can. So for the next one, I guess my request is, can we just take all this and like put a little draft together that we can look at,
So you're absolutely correct, and I think that's kind of what we were throwing out here tonight is kind of here's the big picture. If, as we start to hone in on that, we can do that. I will say as far as staff workload right now, we do have our community rating system audit coming up, so we are trying to get ready for that, in addition to a few other things. So it may not be the next meeting, but if you'll give us a chance to digest kind of what we're going to tackle, then we can set some expectations of when we can get that in front of you guys reasonably. It's very much a priority, but you can understand the community rating system audits kind of, it's hard date for us, so we're trying to kind of get that all pulled together.
And that's a big deal, for sure. I think, to Mr. Rostick's point, we have some probably templates that we could look at, like Cape Coral for one, and from what I know of being affiliated in large organizations and other governmentally related things, plagiarism is alive and well. So, we can borrow some of what they do as an idea conceptually, and then we could kind of whittle it down to what works for us. I think there are plenty of other areas that probably experiencing the same thing or have already gone through where we are right now. Cape Coral being one of them. There's a lot of those communities that are just like ours that we could probably learn from and find out what worked and what didn't work and what they would change if they had the opportunity, just by a few phone calls here and there, exchanging some emails with some of those city leaders.
They don't want to put anything in an email.
Well, good
No, I'm
point. Phone
joking.
call, yeah,
No,
phone call
so-
on a burner phone,
Yeah,
I guess,
exactly.
right?
No, and actually for a few other topics, that's gone really well, just reaching out to them. I think other communities enjoy knowing they're not in it alone and bouncing ideas off each other. So yeah, so the phone calls have definitely gone a long way on a few of the other topics. So I think that's going to be a good thing to start brokering some relationships there.
Great. All right. Anything else before we wrap this little subset up? You guys got anything else you want to add? You good?
Actually, just to touch on the redefining of the shade structure, I really support that, because right now it's lumped into accessory structures, which
Right.
is this huge, broad definition.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think we need to completely carve that out and make it its own little thing.
Are redefining height limitations, take into consideration that a traditional cheeky, while where the structure is like 8 foot, the inside is actually pitched really high because
Right.
it allows for air circulation. And we've actually taken the temperature outside the cheeky from the inside, and it's literally a 10-degree difference.
Yeah.
because the air flows through it so nicely. So just take that into consideration when you're doing your height limitations, that it is taller in the center.
Sure, thank you. I've got myself
that-
out of order here with
To
this,
that
but that's
point,
okay.
actually, for the cheeky thing, if we're gonna go through this, is there, I mean, they don't have to be permitted, but I mean, is there a, like, I guess we would kind of have to make sure that that is specifically, it's very specific, right? So that has to be
Yes.
included in some way, and it's, I don't think you can make restrictions on it in terms of the style, but I think we're gonna have to include that as a piece of this of this section. You know what I'm saying?
Cheeky huts still have to meet the zoning requirements, so
Okay.
you still have to get a permit
Okay.
for a cheeky hut.
They're just not inspected.
Required them to be like a Masuki
Oh,
or
inspected,
a Seminole, like if you made that a requirement. just-
Yes, and that's in a requirement in our code, but it's only for building. So there's building that reviews permit applications, and then planning and zoning also reviews the building applications.
So you could specify that a little bit, even slightly. It's probably
We're
restrictive.
reviewing
but-
how tall
Yeah,
typically a cheeky
right.
hut is.
But that
and
versus
the-
a shade structure which is built with conventional material might be, I guess what I'm saying is like, the way I envision it is you have this one section for conventional shade structures and then another subsection for cheeky huts, so that you're, you know, again, just furthering that specificity. Because I think we want to make that an option.
Good. John, you've been real quiet. You look contemplative over there. Anything?
Oh, just, it's an
Had to
interesting
make sure you
discussion,
were
but
with us.
get some more information, like you were saying, put some stuff together and we can start talking about it specific. It's just real general to me
Mm-hmm.
now, and I think it's one of those things that's gonna be a little bit controversial, so we're
No
gonna have to
doubt.
figure it out.
Yep, we love that. At least we have somebody in the audience, not like the last couple meetings when nobody's here.
Yeah.
It's nice to see smiling faces.
Yeah.
So, no, good stuff. Okay, I guess we'll wrap this little subset up. Good to move on to section C. Thank you, folks. Appreciate your time. Thanks for coming out. 7C, 2.5-foot setback to allow vegetation control. This is going to be riveting.
Yes, I would like, can you guys come back, please? I get all the fun topics.
I've never done this. How do you request like a restroom break?
We can do that.
Just like that, as far as I'm
You-
concerned.
You may.
Okay.
We'll take a, we'll take a 5-minute break here for a comfort break. All right, we're back. This is going right in the gutter. All right, we'll reconvene here. It's been 5 minutes. Hope everybody's comfortable. Our section 7C administrative staff presentations regarding the 2.5-foot setback to allow for vegetative control. Captivate us, please.
Okay, so I'll talk to you guys a little bit about background, and then we'll go over some pictures that I have, as well as a video.
Different kind of crap.
Bump. The artificial Delta 8 type. So we have a little bit about the 2.5-foot setback. The Madeira Beach Land Development Regulation definitions list minor structures as items such as sidewalks, driveways, parking areas, etc. Given this definition, sidewalks, driveways, and parking areas become subject to another code reference, accessory structures. Accessory structures with definitions as referenced subsequently require a 2.5-foot setback from the property line. So what I think has happened over the years is because driveways and sidewalks have been defined as structures, we have required that these be a minimum of 2.5 feet off the property line. The goal is, as you can see in this picture here, if you have a front yard where each driveway is 2.5 feet off the property line, you end up with a nice 5-foot vegetated buffer. The goal was to allow for drainage. Our code doesn't necessarily say that, but I think over the years it's been interpreted and applied such that we end up here. So that becomes kind of the bigger discussion as well. So over the course of the last years, and since I've been doing this, we do require walkways, driveways, everything to be 2.5 feet off the property line. That all sounds well and good until you get to your side yard and you end up with this. This is actually a recent permit. These pavers actually happen to be pervious. So they really wanted the city to allow them to take them all the way up to the property line because they were pervious. But it was difficult because we couldn't figure out, following the letter of the code and how it's interpreted, we couldn't figure out a way to get there. So they did stop 2.5 feet off the property line. And as you can see here, it kind of impedes their side yard usage. So let's see, let's go to the next one.
How is a paver pervious? There's
So-
no grout between them?
And so typically, and so actually we do have a video. It's for, you go ahead and show, we'll go ahead and show the pervious paver. I'll be honest with you, this is more of a commercial grade installation here. It's very robust.
Interesting. Okay, so it percolates in.
Yeah, so this one particularly is set up so that the pavers are a pretty good distance apart, and in between, it's got a larger gravel rock, almost like what you'd see in an aquarium or something. Additionally, below that, there's also larger rock aggregate. This is very, like I said, it's more commercial grade, but you can see how well it performs. It's taking direct discharge from the gutter, and it's barely going 2 feet before it's totally dissipated. So the question becomes, because of how we've been enforcing the 2.5 foot setback, how do we now start looking at pervious paver options as well as artificial turf? And we have another picture of artificial turf. It's becoming very popular, but we do not define non-vegetative pervious material. So it becomes a little tricky. Other municipalities have tried to start putting that into their code. But when we do our ISR, we typically have pervious and non-pervious. A lot of communities will say, okay, you have artificial turf, it's pervious, we'll give you 30% credit for it. So you don't get it like 100% credit for your ISR. You can see here, this is an example of artificial turf going all the way up to the property line. And you can see in the back where it's holding water. So those are things we're trying to kind of better understand with the artificial turf, how it's installed and how it's actually functioning after it's installed. So if it goes all the way up to the property line, is it going to start to discharge onto the adjacent neighbors? And how do we start navigating that? So if we keep the 2.5 foot setback with in mind that it's to help with drainage, but you have a material that's ideally free draining, how do we start, how do we accept that? How do we enforce it? How do we adjust our code to be more up to date with some of the current stuff that's available?
I got a quick question. How did we go to a 2.5 foot structure setback to a sidewalk setback?
Because by definition, we define sidewalks, driveways, and let's see what else. Sidewalks, driveways, and parking areas are defined as structures, minor structures.
Okay, how did that happen? How is a sidewalk a structure?
So that's the first thing, is cleaning up our definitions. So once we do that, that'll have a trickle-down effect on how some of the other stuff is impacted. But I think we can all agree that however that happened in the past, I can't speak to, but yes, And
Well, I
that's-
mean, and that's where I was trying to see, where did it go from a structure to sidewalks and driveways being minor structures? I mean, and I do believe I saw somewhere in there where a driveway or sidewalk's considered to be a minor structure.
Correct. That is how we define it, City of Madeira Beach. So
And that's in one of the ordinances or definitions?
it's in our definition section. Yes, it is in our definition section. And so it's specifically in section 82-2, the definitions there.
Marcy, if I were to recommend something, I would say, let's leave the setbacks alone, but add what they call a landscape buffer of 5 feet. In other words, it would have to meet the minimum setback, each project, and also it would have to meet a landscape buffer, which could be 5 feet as well.
So right now, if we have each property at 2.5 feet, then we get the joined 5 feet. We still end up, unless we, and this is where we're kind of want to, start talking about, is if they do use a pervious material in the instance of the gate and the sidewalk we just saw, would we then not require, would we consider that a non-vegetative pervious material, and in this instance, allow them to go to the property line?
Yeah, but the landscape buffer that I'm sort of alluding to is 5 feet from the property line. So each property could be 5 feet. If you want to reduce it to 2.5 feet, that's fine. Or you can get the overall 5 feet if that's what you're intending. But it would have to be a true landscape where they have to plant hedges, things in that nature, so that supersedes the concern that you would have.
So here's and this is the complaint we're getting. So you can see if we do that, now you can't, unless you're totally grassed, you can't, the access from your front yard to your rear yard via your side yard gets truncated with the hard surface. You can't have that. If we do, most lots can't because the house, a lot of our setbacks are only, in some zones, minimum of 5 feet. So if you have a minimum 5-foot setback you've already met, then your sidewalk, you can't really put a hardscape in around the side yard, if that makes sense. So to
Okay.
put the,
So as I see in the definitions, and I still have a problem with a walkway being a structure. So as I'm reading minor structure, the only thing it refers to as walkway is beach access ramps and walkways. So that's all in one grouping. So beach access ramps and walkways. Nothing about sidewalks or driveways.
and you're in 82-2?
Yes, 82-22. The one's yellow, page 106.
My pages are all off here.
One is major structure, house, mobile home, apartment buildings, condominiums. Minor structure, pile-supported, elevated dune, and beach walkover structures. Beach access ramp and walkways.
Boardwalks, yeah, public and private bathhouses, sidewalks, driveways, parking areas. So that's where it's been pulled from over the years.
Sidewalks, driveways. Parking areas. It seems like to me this is being considered all public areas. So I never understood the 2.5 foot. And a gentleman the other day came up and said the 2.5 foot was designed for auxiliary structures. So if you put up a shed or something, it's 2.5 feet so you can get a lawnmower underneath, behind there.
Correct.
And get around there.
Right.
And the definition of a structure is still something not flat. I mean, I looked it up on my phone earlier and it's, I could see a seawall. A seawall is a structure. Consequently, we're getting into issues of drainage with the seawalls being raised. And it goes back to one of the issues that somebody that I know on John's Pass, their next door neighbor built a new seawall did a new pool, and all that water is now going into her yard. And, you know, and that's where I brought up at that meeting about how Bay Point is a good example of how they're building up, but they have a wall of some sort on the edge of the property, keeping the water on their property. And that's what I said, you know, so all these seawalls are being built up. And, you know, so she's got an older seawall and, you know, so her property is a foot, maybe 1.5 feet below the next door neighbor. And it kind of goes into a thing of like, you know, I still cannot wrap my head around a structure is a sidewalk. You know, whether it was, you know, that's how it had been assumed. I mean, you know, but then that's going back to where, you know, people on the beach had their chairs. Well, the guy had had his chairs out there for 20 years. Well, but he wasn't supposed to have them out there.
Chuck, so you know, Clearwater, City of Clearwater also describes a sidewalk and pavement as structure. And the reason they do it is because of setback purposes. There's a reason behind it, and that's a setback. If you look at the Clearwater Code, and I agree with you. I agree with you.
But it's not a structure.
Sidewalk is considered structure, and an edge of pavement is also in the city code, Clearwater. Doesn't mean I agree with it, but that's how they define it, and they have a reason in their own minds. It's related to setbacks.
And on that same page where you were reading about the minor structures, number 4 is coastal or shore protection structure does list seawalls.
Right.
So that is a structure,
Yes,
right?
exactly. Because it's a wall.
Right.
Chuck, the structure is something that can't be removed. Well, a sidewalk can't be removed unless you can go in there and dig it up with a machine. Once you put a sidewalk in, it's permanent, it's a structure.
Yep.
You're thinking about a building structure, but it's all falls into that same ball of wax.
Just a really short structure.
Shallow structure.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, we have to work within the definitions that we have now.
Yeah.
Right?
Is that what we were, hold on, I feel like we kind of went way off of here.
Yeah.
So I think was that where we were going, was like, what's going on is we don't have a proper definition that's allowing for certain things to exist? And did we finish the presentation yet?
So
Or
we have a few more pictures. It does get, the jumping off point is cleaning up our definitions such that when we do try to, you know, look at stuff and view how we enforce it or how we do it, that we're being clear and consistent on it. So the 2.5-foot setback, you know, how we got here over the years, how it's been interpreted and taught and defined is kind of, it's rearing its head as to the issues it creates and the opportunity possibly to start addressing it through, like we talked about, non-vegetative pervious material and options like that. So we're trying to figure out how to best address that to deal with the drainage, which is really the harder part, right? You not discharging onto your adjacent neighbor. If you take a hard surface all the way up to a vegetated one, that's going to start happening. So I think the biggest thing is we need to start figuring out how to clean up some of these definitions and come up with better ways to imply, like, you know, you said about doing the, you know, buffers, but it does get hard because we do have very narrow lots. So it's another thing like the previous topic where we're going to have to put some thought into it. A lot of the other municipalities just simply say, hey, do what you're going to do, just don't discharge onto your neighbor. So some of them don't even have like a setback for a driveway or a sidewalk in residential areas like this.
It's setback, and then also, do we give a credit for pervious pavers? What's that credit compared to the impervious surface ratio as well as the artificial turf? Because we're getting more and more questions from residents. Can we use pervious pavers? Where can we use it? How much can we use it? Same for artificial turf.
So like, one of the municipalities, let's say you did 50% of your pervious allotment in artificial turf. You don't get 50%. They only say, okay, we're only going to give you 30% for that. So they don't give you you don't get full credit for it as if it were just grass. So they kind of put limitations on it. Some good ones I've seen, Tampa doesn't let people do artificial turf within the right-of-way or within easements. And so some of the research has given us some good ideas about limitations we'd like to apply. Just looking for, want to be consistent and fair and provide some options.
Are there any studies that could be referenced to help us determine how much credit should be given for artificial turf or the pervious pavers or?
Yep, that's what I'm looking into. That's exactly to your point. Like, if you do look at other municipality, I would like to understand why they said, nah, we're only going to say this is 30% of what you get. I couldn't find a direct reference to that, but that is part of the other thing that I would like to dive into is understand.
I've seen grass where
drove
water
that?
pools on it too. You could have St. Augustine turf and water ponds on it because it rains so hard, so fast sometimes that it can't percolate.
Has nowhere to go.
So, regardless of whether it's grass, artificial turf, pervious pavers, you're going to get the same net effect on some of these hard rainstorms that we get. I mean, there's got to be some sort of, study's not the right word, but there's got to be some ratio, some percolation test that's done for the particular surface. And if it can be proven that that surface has a certain percolation rate, then it gets full credit. Or if it's got a lesser percolation rate, then maybe it gets less credit.
And to your point, the specification sheets for a lot of the artificial turf do have percolation numbers. And during one of the rainfalls, I did drive around some of the areas that have installed it. And for the most part, I was very impressed with how well it was keeping up with the rainfall. So I didn't.
I have it, and it's gone. The water's gone. I mean, because my dog uses it too, and I have to hose off where he's been using it, and the water just disappears.
Yeah.
The only thing I've seen is.
That's what if it's done right. And that yard probably was, somebody threw it in or didn't really know what they were doing, and, yeah.
And that's the other thing too.
Inspectors come in, right?
Well, exactly. Like, if we know that it has to have a certain substrate beneath it, then we would want to make sure we take a picture of it, put our eyes on it, and then let them go ahead and go in with the turf. So we would like some flexibility around that. I think it looks great. Some of the pros to it are we don't have as much fertilizer and stuff like that running off.
Yeah.
I will say it gets super hot from some of my experience, but, I don't know if they're all the same as far as their heat and reflectivity, but that's really not anything that we're looking at right now. So I just want to share one more picture with you guys. We do have some properties right now that through the years were just built with this driveway. So you can see this, and this property owner right here, their driveway goes all the way up to the property line to not allow them to repair their asphalt portion of it from the concrete to the street. Just, it wouldn't be fair to them. It would give them like a 9-foot driveway. So that's where the 2.5-foot enforcement becomes, you kind of have to, well, you don't want to use judgment to change code stuff. You kind of have to be reasonable, and at least at a minimum, give people back what they had. So this is just kind of example too sometimes of how the code is written versus, older lots which have already been developed. And you can't put a hardship on them for that.
So in that picture, if they were to replace what's alligator cracking there, they could not do that? Or they can? They just
Correct.
can't make it wider to match the other one?
Per code, we wouldn't. I went out and looked at it. I felt like over the years, what's happened is, once I started kind of peeling it back, I feel like the asphalt was wider than you can visually see there, so I felt like it was a little deceptive.
Okay,
So I worked with this property owner to get them the permit they needed.
okay,
So,
interesting. Yeah, and again, it goes back to these narrow lots. I can see that's one of them. It's a very narrow lot.
And one of the things they were immediately willing to do is, that right now, like, their rain gutters are directed towards the adjacent property, so no problem, he's going to switch them so that they're pointing towards the street or towards their backyard. So most of the time, if you can kind of negotiate some give and take to clean up some other things, to do right by them.
Fair enough. In all things be fair, right? Okay, so this is going to be another bit of ordinance that's going to have to be crafted related to this. Is that the case? Okay.
Well, I kind of believe that do away with the 2.5 foot or do it back to where the 2.5 foot is for an auxiliary structure, not sidewalk or driveway. And sidewalks and driveways are, I would have thought, are a separate beast.
Yeah, is that like what's the biggest pinch point in the code, I guess? Like, is it the minor structure piece that makes this really complicated? Or is it like we just definitely need more definitions for different materials?
I think it's a minor structure definition, and then if we allow pervious pavers, do we classify that as impervious? Do we give them a percentage
A
of
little bit of A, a little
impervious?
bit of B.
Yeah.
Or do we
But
define
it does sound like-
sidewalks as solid concrete and impervious or surfaces?
Yeah.
Right?
Sidewalks
Because you could have a sidewalk be made of pavers that are pervious.
I do think we could do some definition changes that totally help support and make things less difficult and a little more straightforward. I think it's hidden in the definitions
Yeah.
to clean it up.
I'm just thinking like, what's the path of least resistance versus like
Exactly.
writing a whole, like all these ins and outs, and then that always creates more problems down the road, when maybe it's just the fact that a paver area is called a minor structure or whatever, and it's like, okay, well, maybe we can come to an agreement on that
But-
first before, I don't
But
know.
is a pavered area considered a minor structure? Because
It's a
it's,
sidewalk.
but what makes it a sidewalk?
Well, yeah, so a sidewalk, I think it says like sidewalk, drive area. For the most part, yes, because they're either typically used for parking or walking along. So for the most part, most all of that has fell
Oh,
into
it
that
is here,
definition.
actually. A
Yeah.
minor structure is any other uncovered paved areas. But paved, paver,
Yeah,
is it blacktop paving? Or is it
See?
pavers,
It's-
right?
Yes,
So
certain
I-
things seem very straightforward.
Yeah, we're going to continue to run into this when we can't really clearly define what is or isn't allowed. And is it a sidewalk just because you walk on it? And it happens to be something other than grass?
And, yeah, so those are obviously some of the things that we feel like we can clean up with a little work. We can, and like you said, the path of least resistance, touching as little as possible, but getting it kind of revamped.
Sounds like the easiest way to do it is just clarify some of the definitions and leave the code alone.
Yeah.
Without trying to rewrite the code, because then you get into all sorts of potentially unintended consequences.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at, I think. It's just like, how do you can maybe do some redefinition, like you're saying, and not even worry about setback numbers or anything like that. It just seems like the biggest pinch point is sidewalks.
What
or-
is a
Or what
sidewalk?
is, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it would only be the definition section that we would be touching. We want to know what we do with pervious pavers, what we do with artificial turf. Do we allow people to pave right up to the property line? It'll just be a minor change in the definitions. I don't think there's anywhere else in the code that would change. It'd be just a few words removing and adding. But we
I
just want to
agree.
get input.
And also in terms of like if you're going up to the property line, well, one way or the other, you got to make sure your drainage is okay,
Absolutely.
that you're not draining onto your neighbor. So, and be it, if they have to put a trench drain in, French drain, whatever, that's part of what they're going to have to do. And the picture where the pervious pavers, well, it's not going to, it's going to drain. So it's not going to be going to their neighbors. And that, yeah, I mean, if you look at that, that wasn't done professionally.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's like, so any water going on there is going to go down. It's not going to be going to their neighbors. And the grass was not done well. I mean, they probably just threw that down. Got it at Lowe's or Walmart or Home Depot and put it down.
I would separate the definition of impervious I would separate the definition of impervious from drainage to zoning. In other words, with drainage, yes, it's percolating really good, but from the zoning perspective, it's still hard surface. It's still covered. I'm envisioning building let's say a roof that's got 4 columns, but then the dirt beneath is dirt, it's not impervious. So from above, you look at the roof and you say that's impervious from zoning perspective, but then the water can actually go underneath and percolate through the ground, and the net discharge of drainage would be 0. So I would recommend have 2 separate, zoning definition of it and drainage definition of it. Then that should address your concern.
In that case that you had up there with the pervious pavers, where it's like cut off, I mean, is this a pretty isolated situation, or is this something that we're running into more commonly? Because what I'd hate to do is go through all this just because of situation.
We're running into it
All
all
the time?
the
Okay.
time.
Yeah. And most of the time, what happens is people will, what we see most often, honestly, is they'll stop, like right at the corner of the house, they'll stop with their pavers, get their CO, because that's what was permitted, then that extra pallet of pavers gets put in on a Saturday, and now it's all nice on the property line. And that's the biggest complaint we get, right? Because you could drive through right now and see pavers all the way up to the property line. And that's what happens, and this is what drives it, right? This is human nature to fix the problem and
Yeah,
you know,
I can
make it
tell you, my
work.
driveway's concrete, goes up to a curb. On the other side of the curb, my neighbor's got pavers. So it's all, and his entire front yard is pavers, except for a couple little planters, right? He knows, he lives across the street. So obviously, we're
Yeah.
probably in some version of violation of that, but I'm not gonna give you my address right now, so. No,
Well-
but I think it's an ongoing problem for sure, because it does create a drainage situation. For sure, and then we have excess runoff and, all that sort of thing. But, okay, you answered my question. I just didn't want to be trying to change everything to fit one problem, but
Right.
obviously it's pervasive.
Nope, and this was a good example. I've been working with this particular property owner. He's awesome. In fact, these are the pervious pavers that you're watching drain. And so, yeah, he's been just fun to work with because he digs what he's doing, and he's familiar with the drainage and stuff like that. So he's actually been more than willing to, once we get to a certain point, he would come in and do a presentation for us about paver options, because he is interested in not doing like the commercial grade, but what can he do at a homeowner level that's affordable and still achieve similar results. So he's very proactive with it, and I've definitely enjoyed working with him.
Yeah, I think, part of what we're looking at is the why, right? Why are those ordinances in place? And if the goal is the percolation and that satisfies it, why not? If it's a visual effect, that's a different why, right? This obviously creates a really weird scenario for that guy because he's got half pavered, half not. He's got the little gate there. And, how do you walk down the property? Do you move the gate over and then have a solid piece and kind of
Yeah.
you shimmy your way down
Exactly.
sideways so you can walk on the solid surface and not, get
Yeah, it's as
30
simple as
feet.
wheeling your trash cans around, like you can't do it.
Right.
So this was just a good example of kind of what drives home kind of the struggle that.
Do we know what the why is? Why is the ordinance the way it is? Is it to create a visual effect, or is it an ISR effect, or,
We were assuming it's for drainage.
okay.
And that's kind of how it's been portrayed. I do think over the years it morphed into exactly the 2.5 foot for the mower deck to get behind, in between the fence and the shed. Then over the years, the interpretation became, this is a structure, so this has to be 2.5 feet also. It makes sense, it helps with drainage. And then we join, and we've been taught that or told that, so we've carried it on. And the more you experience it, the more you realize, the more you start questioning the why.
Yeah, I mean, if the why is for drainage and that satisfies it, then why not? If it doesn't, then it needs to meet the definition. So I think redefining some of these things is probably the most direct path to getting it.
That's what the gentleman that was at the workshop the other day, he said that's where it got implemented for, not really drainage, but for
mowing.
accessing around the buildings, so that you can get and not have all the stuff overgrowing and everything. So then it just extended to Well, okay, 2.5-foot sidewalk. Well, once again, like I say, I'm sorry, I can't get my head around a sidewalk as being a structure.
Yeah.
You know, even though, yeah, I mean, it can get removed pretty easily. A house cannot be removed pretty easily, or a hut cannot be removed. You know, so that's where I was questioning so much why. I mean, you know, like a structure. A structure is a structure. And as it said in there, if you've got pilings and things in the structures for the sidewalks going to the beach, those sidewalks are structures because there's something structurally underneath them holding them in place. Where a sidewalk, you know, you get a big rainstorm or a flood, that sidewalk's gone.
Well, I think that's the beauty of being a government. You get to define words the way you want them to be, right? So we just have the opportunity at this point to redefine structure or, and grant an okay for whether something's impervious or not, based on the standards that we get from these percolation tests and things like that. So anyway, it sounds like the job to me is redefine. You have something, Mr. Rustick, please? Of course, please do. It's just a family affair here.
Well, thank you kindly.
I'm probably not doing this right, so if I'm doing it wrong, you just throw something at me.
Or throw
You
something
went off
at
the
me.
rails a long time ago.
I thought so.
You're in charge, it's good.
Well, don't put me in charge.
It's your show.
Thank you. A point to Commissioner Dillon. A fence is a structure, but we allow that on the property line to delineate property ownership. Then
But
we
it is
have-
a structure.
It's a structure, correct. The only other point I want to make is, not that we have any commercial entities that would be like a halfway home or anything. What about ADA compliance? You think 2.5 foot of pavers and 2.5 foot of dirt is going to be ADA compliant? No. I think the potential issue is the legality of, we allow a homeowner 2.5 foot, 2.5 foot of dirt, say that the property line from the house is 5 foot. We have a slip, trip, and a fall. They could potentially come after the city, saying, the city made me do this. And then it goes to court, and it's like, oh, wait a minute here. You're not, so I'm just putting that out there. Just, we have to keep in mind, we have a high water table no matter what. As long as we can direct the water flow front to back, I think we're okay. I believe, and it's my personal opinion, the 2.5 foot setback, it's got to go away. That picture right there, it's sad that we have to live with that. It's like, this is no good for anybody. And that's all I have to say is
Well,
ADA compliance.
And to that, we approved a new triplex over on, over by you guys, that it's a 40, they've got a 40-foot wide property, so they got 5-foot easements on each side. So how can you do 2.5 feet? You cannot have a sidewalk, they cannot get to their back with a 2.5 foot whatever.
No, and most gates are either 32, 36, or 48, or 42 or 48 inches wide.
Yeah.
It's just, I think if you would cant the pavers, just a little angle to them to keep the wood on the property and have it run it front to back.
All right, but you have to have, at least the sidewalk's got to be at least 3 foot wide.
Absolutely.
So and if you got 5 foot wide,
44 inches for ADA.
well, okay.
It's 44, isn't it?
Yes, 44.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
mean, you know, so their whole 5 foot basically is going to be a sidewalk. So what do you do to them? You don't allow them to have a sidewalk? And that's the idea of, I guess, the sidewalk.
You can't do that to people. We have to be reasonable.
Well, no, not if we do away with the 2.5 foot, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, well, 2.5 foot, you need the 2.5 foot for structures. A sidewalk, once again, I'll go back to, is not a structure. I don't believe, and like you said, Jim, a fence is a structure. So you got the fence, and now you got a 5 foot there, so now you're down to,
So then we just have to
4.5
clean up
feet.
the language and spell it out. This is not a structure, that.
Right.
And then we're golden. It's clean up the language.
Yeah.
Life is good. Thank you.
no, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Clear as mud. Perfect. There you go. All right, we expect a solid draft of this by Friday. Perfect. All right. Anything else?
Thank you, guys.
I didn't think this was going to take that long.
Oh, I could go on and on. I'm kidding.
We good? Any more? All right. Any other discussion points that we haven't beaten to death yet? Any other items you want to see addressed, looked at, concerns for the good of the city? No? All right. Our next meeting scheduled for Monday, August 7, same location, same time. Are there any other information materials we're in need of? I don't see any. So that's about it. Thanks, folks. We'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.